Hello everyone, and I'm Autobot Sonic the Telltale Gamer, bringing latest and everything Telltale games, Transformers, and more. And today we are back with another Cyberverse review. This time we're covering Cyberverse Season 3, Episode 9, The Trial, and Episode 10, The Prisoner. Now, I gotta say, with these two episodes, in my opinion, they are the weakest episodes of Season 3, but they're not bad episodes, not like to the degree that, we had Season 2 with the Crossroads. It's not that level bad, or Season 1 with all the Rescue Windblade episodes. They're not bad episodes, they just have some stuff that I'm not really fond of, and make the episodes more so just a little bit above average than just inherently, like, bad or even good or great, like most episodes in Season 3 were so far. They're not, like, horrible episodes, it's just that my enjoyment of them wasn't as much as I did with the others, despite them still being pretty good for the most part. But anyway, we're going to start with Episode 9, The Trial, and see everything this episode did right and what it did wrong. Now, starting off with Episode 9, The Trial, this episode starts off presumably a little bit after the events of Episode 8, The Citizen, where we saw that Hot Rod, despite McAdam not wanting the Autobots and Decepticons to reactivate Iaconus to destroy the Quintessons, Hot Rod wants to go ahead and do it anyway. So it basically starts with presumably Hot Rod, Whirl, Perceptor, Dead End, and Clobber, all just making their way through Iaconus to try and figure out how to get to him in order to, like, how to get to the center of Iaconus in order to reactivate him. And so we go through a little scene where they're just all going through, like, all different, like, defense mechanisms of Iaconus when they finally get into contact with a room that houses Iaconus' face. And Hot Rod, however, is stumped on how to figure out how to reactivate Iaconus, and Perceptor says it's physically impossible unless they have a city speaker. So now Hot Rod is determined to go save Windblade from the loop in effort to try and get her to reactivate Iaconus. And that leads us to the first main part of this episode, where we see Hot Rod and Clobber go into the loop, while Perceptor, Whirl, and Dead End sneak into the Quintesson holding facility where all the other Autobots and Decepticons are being held to basically try and find Windblade and see if they can, like, get ready to save her once she's broken out of the loop. So what's interesting here is something that I have a problem with. So in this, when Perceptor, Dead End, and Whirl are all in the Quintesson holding facility and they've managed to locate Windblade, Perceptor ends up putting some sort of signal jammer on top of Windblade's mask that's over her face. So we'll get back to that later when we cut back to Hot Rod and Clobber, who have just entered the loop again, trying to find Windblade, who see her at the parade with Chromia. So while Clobber distracts Chromia, that gives Hot Rod enough time to talk to Windblade and try to convince her to break out of the loop by transforming. So at this point, where he tells Perceptor to activate the signal jammer that he put on Windblade's mask, and what essentially that does is that it causes Windblade to actually be able to see, instead of what's going on in the parade, what's happening in the real world with all the Quintessons holding all the Autobots and Decepticons. And understandably so, Windblade is, like, horrified by this, and Hot Rod seems like he's actually going to be able to make it to get Windblade to escape the loop. But just before she can do that, though, some Quintessons manage to catch on to the fact that Whirl, Perceptor, and Dead End are trying to break Windblade out, and they've been trying to hide by using these fake masks that they put on their face whenever a Quintesson drone comes by. But for some reason, Whirl can't find his mask, and that causes the drones to attack Whirl, Perceptor, and Dead End, to the point where, in the chaos, they end up destroying the signal jammer or knocking it off of Windblade's mask. And for some reason, she just resorts back to as if, like, she never saw what just happened. And honestly, this bothers me a lot, because we saw back in the last I believe it was the Sleeper, where we saw that Hot Rod was trying to convince Optimus over and over through multiple loops to break out of the loop. He remembered Hot Rod from earlier versions of the loop. So if memories seem to transfer between different parts of the loop, why Windblade just suddenly forget everything that she saw over there? And if that's the case, why didn't Perceptor constantly use this signal jammer on other people? Like, I think this would have helped a lot with getting Bumblebee out, or Optimus. I mean, granted, they would have to find wherever Optimus or Bumblebee were actually held in that little holding area, but still, it doesn't make sense why they didn't try to use the signal jammer beforehand. But anyway, while Hot Rod and Clobber pull out a loop to go save Whirl, Perceptor, and Dead End from all the Quintesson drones, in the process, Whirl ends up getting captured by a few Quintesson drones, but manages to escape by transforming. And in the process, basically like gets shot down by one of the Quintesson drones, and in the process like does like a little tumble on the ground with one of his helicopter blades actually cutting loose Soundwave's mask in the process and freeing him from the loop. Though I was gonna mark this as sin because I'm thinking like, oh well, if Whirl can just chop off all the masks, why doesn't he just do that and save everyone? But that actually will come into play, and we'll learn the answer for why they don't do this later on this episode and even early next episodes, and I'm really glad that they addressed that, because if that was the case and they could just cut free or rip off everyone's masks, that'd just be like, well, why were they going through the whole trouble of the loop in this case? But anyway, what Soundwave's free, but it just seems to be unconscious still, or still in the process of rebooting, when Hot Rod and Clobber finally make it to the holding cell to save Dead End, Perceptor, and Whirl. Though in the process, Hot Rod ends up getting captured by the Quintessons. Clobber tries to save him, but is unable to reach him in time and gets taken away to face the Quintesson judge. Now, it's cool to have Hot Rod basically finally meet up with the Quintesson judge, because we get this cool scene where, the Quintesson judge is honestly a pretty cool character in my opinion, is a nice little callback to how the Quintessons were in the original G1 cartoon, and also gives us a more broader scope as to what exactly the Cyberverse version of the Quintessons are. And I gotta say, the Cyberverse Quintessons are honestly really scary to a degree. So essentially when Hot Rod actually even goes to meet the judge, he ends up getting escorted there by two Sharkticons, one of them actually sporting the same green snout face paints that Hot Rod himself wore back in episode 15 of Season 2 Wiped Out, when he was essentially the muscle for the snouts. So I don't know if maybe those Sharkticons that were the snouts were always part of the Quintesson army, or maybe in the years between the events of seasons 2 and 3, there was that the Quintessons ended up kidnapping the snouts, or basically assimilating them into their forces. But anyway, it's a nice little callback that Hot Rod does mention and tries to persuade the Sharkticon to help him out, considering they're both former snouts, but the Sharkticon's not having it and just takes Hot Rod to see the judge. And I really love all the different clashing personalities with the judge and all of its different faces. Reminds me a lot of animated Blitzwing in that sort of sense. But essentially we basically learn the motivations of why the Quintessons have attacked Cybertron, and though we don't know when they took over, we know now why they're taking over. And so essentially in Cyberverse, the Quintessons are essentially a multiversal omniscient being, where essentially they travel the multiverse from universe to universe, basically judging to see if they deserve to be a survivor or not. And immediately I'm getting flashbacks to Dragon Ball Super with Grand Zeno and all the different angels and gods of destruction and that. But so the judge essentially states that they go to each multiverse, enslave a planet, see if that planet is worth like the whole universe surviving, and if not, they just destroy that universe and move on. And so Hot Rod is just totally in awe of just how big of a scope this is, because I thought the Quintessons were just going to be like, oh, a single being, but no, these guys travel the whole multiverse, which we saw again back in the Season 2 finale, where we had all the different arcs coming in to help our main arc break through Unspace to get to Cybertron. And hopefully that's something we get to see more of in this, that we get to really see the origins of these Quintessons. I know we won't see how they took over Cybertron, but maybe see like why they feel the need to go around judging like all these universes to see if they survive, like what gives them the authority to. And hopefully that's something that gets explored later on in these last few episodes of the Quintesson arc. But anyway, while Hot Rod is basically trying to stall the Quintessons, basically just they're trying to like grill him for information as to how he and the rest of the Autobot resistance has been unable to be caught by the Quintesson drones. Hot Rod's just not giving up any information, and so the judge sends Hot Rod to be taken back to the loop, but Hot Rod's not having it, and instead manages to escape the Sharkticons, only to find out he is still hanging on the very end of the large Quintesson tower that we've seen several times throughout the season so far. But without running out of options, though, Hot Rod decides that he's going to just take a leap of faith and jumps off the tower to dodge all the Quintessons. But thankfully, Whirl's been out there this whole time looking for Hot Rod and manages to catch him and bring him safely back to McAdams, where everyone else is. But before Hot Rod even gets saved by Whirl, I forgot to mention that there's this other cool side plot that's with Whirl, Perceptor, and Dead End after Hot Rod saved them all from the Quintessons. So it's basically with Dead End and Clobber and Perceptor all running away from the Quintesson base after they're saved by Hot Rod, thinking that they're not able to save Hot Rod. But then they see Soundwave limping out of the base, heavily, like, not injured, but the fact that he just doesn't look right, he's glitching all over, and then just suddenly collapses in front of Dead End and Clobber. So Clobber takes Soundwave back to McAdams with Dead End and Perceptor, with Whirl staying out to do recon to try and find Hot Rod, which he does at the end of this episode. But while Whirl's out, Perceptor, Clobber, and Dead End are all at McAdams, with Perceptor worried about Hot Rod being taken by the Quintessons, and Dead End and Clobber trying to figure out how they're going to reactivate Soundwave. So while Perceptor is musing over Hot Rod, McAdam reassures him, saying that he's fine because he hasn't met the Scientist yet. Now, the Scientist is a character we do see a little bit of at the end of next episode, The Prisoner, but honestly, I'm really interested to see where the Scientist is going to do. And again, this is a nice little callback again to McAdam being able to tell the future to some degree, as we saw this back in McAdams when he told Windblade and Bumblebee that they would need to find the King of the Dinosaurs, aka Grimlock, to save Cybertron. So it's cool to see that McAdam's still dropping all these hints to later episodes that are going to go happen later on in this season, and see exactly what this Scientist figure is going to do in regards to helping out Hot Rod and the rest of the anti-Quintesson resistance battle against Quintessons. But anyway, after this little cutaway, we do cut back to the main plot, which I just went over, of Hot Rod escaping the judge, being saved by Whirl, and taking back, where he does see that he did manage to free Soundwave. And it ends rather abruptly there, with Hot Rod being thrown back into McAdams with Whirl and noticing that Soundwave has been saved, but is still deactivated due to his whatever glitch is going on with him. But that's going to be it for my review of Transformers Cyberverse Season 3, Episode 9, The Trial. If I had to rate this episode, I would probably give it a 7.5 out of 10. Definitely a pretty good episode, but the only things that I had a problem with were, why doesn't if Perceptor can just have this signal jammer that stops the parade for whoever they're trying to break out of the loop, why doesn't he just bring this every single time that they go out to do something? Why do they have to just go through all the loop and just try to convince people the regular way if the signal jammer doesn't mess with anything? Also, I will say, as cool as it was to see that the judge and see their justification for wanting to take over Cybertron and destroy this universe, I do wish we got a little bit more of them, in my opinion. But that's gonna be it for this. We're gonna move on now to Episode 10, The Prisoner, which honestly, I can't say it's better than this episode, but it does have some good moments. Moving on to Episode 10, The Prisoner, we start with basically, presumably, like, shortly after the events of the trial, where Soundwave has now woken up after being in basically a coma, sort of, for shutdown mode, from being taken out of the loop by Whirl. So Soundwave is clearly not exactly on good terms with Hot Rod, with both sides of the resistance now divided, with Soundwave leading the Decepticon side and Hot Rod leading the Autobot side, and McAdam obviously notices the tension and tries to break the ice with a little bit of Energon. And so while Hot Rod seems to try and put it underwater on the bridge, Soundwave, though, clearly is not interested in working with Hot Rod. So Hot Rod tries to take charge and basically make a plan where they want to go ahead and try, and if they can kill the judge, that will bring about an end to all the rest of the Quintessons. But Soundwave just calls it a stupid plan and says that he sucks as a leader, basically just flat out not calling him, he says that he's no Optimus, which I think is another cool thing back to how, again, I'm making a lot of comparisons to More Than Meets the Eye, which, funnily enough, actually, as I'm recording this today on January 11th, today marks the 10-year anniversary of the release of the first issue of More Than Meets the Eye. So maybe later this year I may actually do a review of the first issue of More Meets the Eye, just to celebrate the 10th anniversary of that. It'll be my first ever comic review. But anyway, while Soundwave is basically just chastising Hot Rod's clearly getting pissed off by the fact that Soundwave is just mocking him and just calling him a horrible leader, and states that he wants to take charge of the whole Quintesson resistance instead. But Hot Rod's not having that, so instead, Soundwave and Hot Rod get into a fight where Soundwave is about to unleash a large, sound wave onto Hot Rod. But before he can do that, his speakers start playing the same music from the parade, and he starts glitching and freezing up again, which everyone notices. So Perceptor goes to scan Soundwave and learns that apparently the reason why he's glitching out is because he was removed from the loop in the way he was, which is by Whirl chopping off the little little cable that connected his mask to the rest of the Quintesson tower. And so this is why how we learn why doesn't just Hot Rod and everyone else just pull off everyone's masks in the in the loop instead of just having to go through all the trouble of going through the loop, telling them they need to transform to break out of the loop. This is why. So Hot Rod explains to Dead End, and I think it's Dead End and Whirl, that the reason why they don't do this is because they previously tried to rip off the mask of an Autobot named Hound, who, of course, Hound's been a main character throughout several different Transformers media in the past, most notably the Bayverse films, G1 and IDW, but we never actually see Hound in Cyberverse. All we know is that Hound was one of the first Autobots that Hot Rod, Clobber, and Perceptor managed to free from the loop by, instead of just convincing him to transform, instead just ripped his mask off, though apparently Hound ended up just going either really ill or just his systems just failed and died after the events, after he was just forcibly removed from the loop. So that's why they go through all the trouble of just breaking into the loop with the cortical psychic patches and trying to convince people to transform that way, because that's the only real safe way to escape the loop. So eventually, though, Perceptor alongside, I think it's Dead End and alongside Dead End, managed to fix up Soundwave again, and they come up with a plan to try and figure out what they're going to do next. So Soundwave decides to instead take out a Quintesson drone and interrogate it for information, but Hot Rod thinks it's ridiculous because you can't really interrogate a Quintesson drone. Yet Soundwave goes out there, takes one out, and brings it back in, though, again, since the Quintesson drones are kind of just mindless drones, they don't really have any information. So instead, Hot Rod proposes a plan to attack a Sharkticon commander and interrogate them instead. So, while Soundwave still clearly isn't fond of Hot Rod being the leader, he agrees to go on with the plan. And I gotta say, I really like the dynamic here. Despite the fact that I have a couple problems with this episode, I do like the dynamic between Hot Rod and Soundwave in this episode, where the two of them are essentially, basically, for lack of better terms, more like the second in commands of each of the Autobot Decepticons. We had Soundwave as the second in command of the Decepticons, Hot Rod second in command of the Autobots. Both of them are the leaders now of their own anti-Quintesson resistances, and it's cool to see them go to heads. And I gotta say, there have been, like, throughout, like, the past 2 years, I've seen a lot of people shipping Cyberverse, Hot Rod, and Soundwave, and because I guess, like, you can most likely say it was because of this episode, because that I can totally see why, even though I'm not sure, like, I wouldn't go far as shipping them together, but I can totally see that there's, like, a really unique relationship between Hot Rod and Soundwave and Cyberverse that I can totally understand why people are into that through this episode. So Hot Rod and Soundwave lead all the Autobots and Decepticons out of McAdams to this other place where they do see a Sharkticon like general giving orders to a bunch of Quintesson drones. So Hot Rod tries to make a plan to essentially have both the Autobots and Decepticons split up to try and corner the Sharkticon, but Soundwave just goes ahead and says the exact same thing, which gets on Hot Rod's nerves. So Soundwave tells Whirl to go ahead and do aerial recon while he tasks Dead End to work with him, but before he sends Clobber to go out with Hot Rod, he pulls Clobber aside and tells her to do something before leaving with Dead End. So then Clobber goes over to Hot Rod, and the two of them decide to take a path down an alley that Clobber leads them down. While they're doing that, though, after they get into the alley, Clobber apologizes to Hot Rod before attacking him, and this is where my biggest problem with this episode comes in. It's that Clobber tries to kill Hot Rod because Soundwave told her to. Now, again, we saw this back in Season 2 with Episode 4, Bring Me to Spark Optimus Prime, when we saw that, I think it was Soundwave who actually tasked Clobber with sabotaging Shockwave's lab in an effort to make sure Soundwave was the one who killed Optimus Prime. But so it's clear that Clobber does fear Soundwave to a degree, but we saw just throughout earlier this season, these past few episodes, just how loyal Clobber was. She even went out of his way in I believe it was just in the sleeper to save him from when he went out on his own to try and save Optimus from the loop. So why would she now, just because Soundwave told her to, try and kill Hot Rod? I don't understand why all reasons now Clobber just seems to be like, oh yeah, like, you're my best friend, Hot Rod, but Soundwave told me to kill you, so yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. So I don't know, it just makes Clobber just seem honestly low-key kind of pathetic, and it really is disappointing considering just how much I've grown to love her character these past episodes, just to have her just seemingly switch her allegiance to Soundwave on a dime. I get it's because of fear out of Soundwave, but still, she risked her life to save Hot Rod just 2 episodes ago, and now she's okay with killing him? I don't understand this, but while Hot Rod's battling with Clobber, we cut back to Soundwave with Dead End, with the two of them finding the Sharkticon and attempting to capture him. So Soundwave again tries to do another sound blast on this drone on the Sharkticon to knock him out, but again, because of the fact that he was removed from the loop improperly, he does end up glitching out again and plays the parade music over his speakers. So while Hot Rod and Clobber are fighting, Hot Rod does notice that does hear the music and notices that Soundwave's in trouble, so he tells Clobber to stop fighting him and the two of them need to go save Soundwave. So the two of them, again, Clobber just decides to stop fighting Hot Rod anyway, which, again, I don't really understand that. But anyway, the two of them head over to help Dead Ends battle the Sharkticon and save Soundwave. So eventually, when Whirl comes in to help capture the Sharkticon General, basically all of the Autobots and Decepticons are trying to figure out what they're going to do with Soundwave next. And so Hot Rod jokes about saying that they should just leave Soundwave to be taken back into the loop or killed by the Quintessons, which everyone seems to be on board with, strangely enough. But Hot Rod dismisses it immediately, saying that that's not what Autobots do, and despite Soundwave trying to kill Hot Rod, he does deserve a second chance, which I think is another great turning point for Hot Rod's character, the point where, despite how jaded Hot Rod's been these past few episodes since the Quintesson arc began, it's cool to see that Hot Rod still has his Autobot morals at heart, to the point where he is willing to give Soundwave a second chance, despite the fact that he tried to convince Clobber to kill him. But anyway, that leads us back to McAdams, where while Hot Rod and everyone's just decompressing after capturing Sharkticon General, Hot Rod's wondering where Soundwave is, and so I think it's Clobber or Dead End who tells him that he's downstairs in McAdams, or inside Iaconus, I should say, torturing the Sharkticon General for information. So Hot Rod just not having any of this and heads down immediately to try and stop Soundwave, where we see that Soundwave is emitting some very low, very high-pitched frequency that only Sharkticons can hear, in effort to basically torture the Sharkticon into revealing information on the Quintesson judge. Though Hot Rod is totally against this, saying that torture isn't the Autobot way, and Soundwave does give a nice little reference to his famous quote from G1, the Soundwave superior, Autobots inferior, where it basically says that because the Autobots aren't resort to torture, they are inferior and therefore Decepticons are superior. So I thought that was a cute little callback to Soundwave's famous line there. But anyway, still Hot Rod is just not having it, and therefore gets into a fight with Soundwave. And I gotta say, this fight with Soundwave and Hot Rod is really cool, and despite the fact that Soundwave still isn't at 100%, given the fact that he is under the effects of being improperly removed from the loop still, Soundwave does still put up a decent fight, but Hot Rod does manage to beat him and puts him back into a stasis lock with the glitchiness he's sustained from being removed from the loop. And so just when he does, Clobber, Dead End, Perceptor, and the rest of the Resistance does come down in time to notice that the fight is ended, and Hot Rod says to have Soundwave, I think he says to have Soundwave locked up or just take him away. I don't exactly remember, but then Hot Rod goes to the Sharkticon, who's now recovered, asking him what he knows about the Quintessons. And unfortunately, Sharkticon knows nothing, but does manage to say that the scientist does know, and so that they need to find, if they want to look for answers, to find the Quintesson scientist, just as we see a little sneak peek of the scientist from behind as he's working in some sort of underground lab under the big Quintesson tower. And so I assume that's what the next two episodes are going to be about, with Hot Rod and the rest of the Autobot Resistance going after this Quintesson scientist in the hopes of figuring out a way to break out of the loop. And so that was my review of Transformers Cyberverse Season 3, Episode 10, The Prisoner. If I had to rate this episode, on the other hand, if I gave Episode 9 a 7.5 out of 10, this episode I would give either a 7 or a 6.5 out of 10. It does have some good moments, but the fact is that most of this episode revolves around just Clobber, for some reason, betraying Hot Rod to try and kill him just because Soundwave threatened her to do so. And I get that Clobber is afraid of Soundwave, but we just saw Clobber risk her life 3 episodes ago to save Soundwave from the Quintessons when she didn't have to. Why, of all reasons, now would she just decide to try and kill Hot Rod despite this? It just doesn't make sense to me, and the whole, even though it was cool to see Hot Rod and Soundwave get butt heads with each other constantly throughout this episode, it did get a little bit repetitive over time, that I wasn't too fond of that. But anyway, that's going to be it for this review. I'll be back soon with Episode 11, The Scientist, and Episode 12, The Alliance, which hopefully are a better duo of episodes than these two were. If you like these reviews, if you like, comment, and of course subscribe, and I will see you guys later. Take it away, Bumblebee.
Bumblebee out.
And I might know what our future, but then you still control the